Hey guys, so earlier last week I shared a survey to get players' thoughts on Master Duel, and so this will represent what people think of the game as of the end of Season 1. It may be interesting to see what people think of the game later down the line after this initial hype, so maybe I can do a follow-up survey in the future. Anyways, we had a total of 937 players respond, so thank you for taking the time to do that, especially if you shared the survey on various platforms. Starting with the player profile as usual, for the age breakdown we see the typical, with players mostly being in the early 20s, and the 19 to 29 age groups basically making about over 80% of the sample. Shout out to the players in the 40 plus age group, definitely never too old to play Yu-Gi-Oh! As for competitiveness, those who consider themselves as a competitive player, so someone who would regularly attend locals and regionals and YCSs if there weren't any restrictions, made up 20% of the sample, and then about 35% consider themselves as semi-competitive, which are players that at least would regularly go to locals and or participate in competitive online tournaments, and lastly about 45% consider themselves as casual, so those who almost never go to locals or any competitive events and are basically just playing for fun either by themselves or with friends. Now note that this likely is not a true representation of the Yu-Gi-Oh population, since there's bound to be way more casual players than competitive players, but just keep in mind my typical audience of the channel and those who are more likely to respond, which are likely more competitive players, and who knows, maybe competitive players are more likely to play Master Duel. As for the number of years played among the survey respondents, almost a third said that they played Yu-Gi-Oh for at least 10 years, and essentially 80% of the sample having played at least 3 years. Now as we move towards the actual questions related to Master Duel, I'm going to break down everything by casual and competitive players, where I group the competitive and semi-competitive players into one category, so let's get to it. Now let's start with questions regarding solo mode, with the first asking whether you thought the tutorial in solo mode were comprehensive enough to teach a brand new player to the game. Whether casual or competitive, both parties seem to lean towards agreeing, with almost half of them saying that they at least agree, but you do see that casual players are more likely to strongly disagree that these modes are enough to teach the new players to the game, which makes sense since a part of the casual player base are new players, so they would know better, whereas the competitive players are just assuming it would be enough to teach a new player to the game, but it's hard to get ourselves in a new player mindset since we're already so experienced with the game. In terms of what players thought of the difficulty of this solo mode, the majority in both casual and competitive player base thought it was just right at about 41%, but again, no surprise, you do see that the competitive players are likely to say that it is easy to very easy compared to casual players. Now solo mode can potentially be difficult if you have to use the loner decks, but I didn't want to get too specific and wanted to get people's overall thoughts on the solo mode. Next is the overall satisfaction of the solo mode, and you see that little over half of each party felt at least satisfied with the mode, with another big third saying that they feel neutral. Personally, I think the mode is a great addition and brings something new to Yu-Gi-Oh, where we actually get some kind of content revolving around the Yu-Gi-Oh lore, which has not been officially explored too much by Konami. Hopefully they can keep adding more content to this mode. Now let's move on to players' thoughts on ranked play. In terms of difficulty, you do see that competitive players were more likely than casual players to say that ranked play is easy, which isn't surprising, but still roughly 34 to 36% in both parties felt the difficulty level was just right, and of course this also depends on the kind of deck you decided to run in ranked play. There's obviously been a lot of complaints that ranked play ends too short, with Platinum Tier 1 being the highest rank so far, and even in Season 2 it looks like that won't change. Next is the satisfaction level of the best of 1 format versus the traditional best of 3 format, and no surprise, you do see competitive players being more likely to be dissatisfied to strongly dissatisfied on this format compared to casual players, with almost half of the competitive players feeling this way. Best of 1 is nice and quick, but for actual competitive practice, we of course would prefer best of 3, but for those who are not interested in competitive play to begin with, the best of 1 is likely the best option. And let's see if Konami will at least bring options for us to do either approach later down the road. In terms of overall satisfaction of ranked play, both parties were generally satisfied, with at least 55 to 60% thinking this way, and while there's obviously more work to be done in ranked play, I think it's been a fun experience so far for the most part, and most players seem to agree. Related to the ranked play, I also wanted to ask about players' thoughts on the ban list used in Master Duel. Now the results for this is pretty well spread out, with competitive players being more likely to be dissatisfied to strongly dissatisfied than casual players. Not surprising since competitive players are going to be used to our current TCG ban list. At the same time, you do see that 17% of casual and competitive players were both very satisfied with the list used in Master Duel, so lots of differing opinions. Next, I asked about what players think Master Duel should do regarding the ban list moving forward. Now I realized I made a mistake on my survey where I had said that the current approach is an outdated OCG list. Turns out Master Duel in fact does have its own unique list, which was a slightly tweaked version of the April 2021 OCG list, so my apologies for that, but because there was a very small number of people that chose that option, I grouped it with the response of wanting a unique Master Duel list. Anyways, you see that to no surprise, the majority of the competitive players want the most recent TCG or OCG list implemented, depending on which region you play in, versus casual players that mostly wanted a unique Master Duel ban list. At the same time, there was still a large chunk in both parties that wanted the other option as well, and so it was not a unanimous decision. I personally would prefer that Master Duel use the most recent TCG/OCG ban list with the option to play under either list. At the same time, some people made a good point that Master Duel should have its own unique list if we are sticking with the best of one format, because that can change things. So let's see what Konami ends up doing. And of course, the infamous Maxx question where I asked what players thought of this card being legal in Master Duel, since it is of course banned in the TCG list. The results were sort of spread out as well, although of course competitive players were more likely to say very dissatisfied at 29%, but even among competitive players that are used to playing under the TCG list, a good amount still felt satisfied with this card being legal, but the card is still banned as of the most recent TCG list that will take effect on February 7th. Now let's cover questions related to the point system in this game, starting with your thoughts on how much you get for dismantling cards. Overall, it looks like both parties were more satisfied than dissatisfied, and at least there is a method of getting a card outright than having to try to pull it from packs. Now a very similar question is regarding your thoughts on the points you need to have to craft cards, which again, both parties seem to be more satisfied than dissatisfied. I do think trying to get points for ultra rares can be pretty difficult after a while, but I guess it can't be too easy. Next, as for the satisfaction level and the amount of gems you need to purchase packs, both casual and competitive players seem to think pretty similarly on this, with a slightly more leniency towards being dissatisfied than satisfied. I think at the start you get a lot of gems easily and getting packs is pretty easy, but over time, getting gems can be a grind, and so it will be interesting to see the response for this question way later down the road after this initial hype. As for the amount of gems obtained from solo mode, it seems like players are generally more satisfied than dissatisfied. The solo modes are generally pretty quick and you can rack up those gems that way pretty fast, at least at the start of the game. However, when it comes to the amount of gems you obtain from ranked play, it is clear that both player bases are rather dissatisfied about this, and rightfully so. You honestly get pennies from winning in ranked play, and you don't get too much from moving up the ranks either. So let's move on to questions related to cost, where I asked players if they felt Master Duel was an expensive game to play in terms of having to spend real money. It was a bit spread out where both parties were slightly more likely to disagree versus agree. I mean, at the beginning of the game, you can definitely build 1 to 2 competitive decks without spending a penny, which is great, but at the same time, over time, if we want to build the next best competitive deck as if it was on Dueling Book, it can potentially get expensive because you're just not going to have as many craft points anymore, and you'll have to spend money on gems. But for now, in its early stages for Master Duel, I don't think the game is expensive, and we'll see if maybe things change where it can still be affordable over time. In terms of whether Master Duel has increased or decreased the players' interest in purchasing physical cards, about 40% of casual players said that their interest increased, which is really good in Konami's perspective to promote sales. Casual players were also more likely to be interested in purchasing physical cards than competitive players, but I mean competitive players were already buying physical cards anyway, so I suppose their interest likely won't go up too much further because of Master Duel. Overall, the majority said they felt neutral though. Now, I was curious what other Yu-Gi-Oh simulator or game people use as their primary choice prior to the release of Master Duel, and Duel Links was very popular among casual players at 27%, compared to competitive players where their primary choice was Dueling Book at 39%. EDO Pro seemed roughly equally popular among both casual and competitive players, and there were several other simulators at lower frequencies like YG Omega, Dueling Nexus, and Legacy of the Duelist. I'm not even sure what other simulators there are, but we had some of those, with a small chunk saying that they never played any other simulator prior to Master Duel. Now, despite the existence of Master Duel, we see that about 55% of casual players and 72% of competitive players will still use their other simulator of choice moving forward. For me as a competitive player, I know I'll definitely use Dueling Book because it uses the actual TCG list in a best of 3 format to replicate real competitive play, whereas until Master Duel can offer that, it will just be more for alternative fun option for me, which, don't get me wrong, is a nice needed refresher as well. About a third of the casual players and a quarter of competitive players did indicate that they will only play Master Duel moving forward, so I'm sure Konami is happy with that. Let's just hope that they don't take down the other simulators. As for the amount of time you have spent on Master Duel per week, looks like the majority play less than 10 hours a week, although you do have about 7 to 9% of casual and competitive players running Master Duel like a full-time job at 40 plus hours. Keep in mind that at the time of this survey, this was during the initial couple of weeks when Master Duel was released, so players probably played this game a lot more than they typically may down the road due to the initial hype. As for overall thoughts, you do see that both casual and competitive players unanimously agree that Master Duel is good for promoting Yu-Gi-Oh, and that's cool to see. In terms of your interest in Yu-Gi-Oh, again, most players, whether casual or competitive, stated that Master Duel increased their interest in the game, particularly the casual player base. Next, as for the overall satisfaction level of Master Duel, again we see a majority players saying that they are satisfied to very satisfied. Now of course maybe this satisfaction level might be lower if I do the survey again in a few months down the line compared to the initial release period, but it's been a good product so far and better to have it than not. Now let's cover your favorite YuGiTuber streamers for Master Duel content, and before I continue, a couple of important points. Firstly, if you're a fellow YuGiTuber, please don't take the numbers personally, especially if you didn't even make it to the drop down option on the survey. Honestly, I just don't know everyone, and if you were ever mentioned in the other section, I made sure to sum up every iteration of your channel name that was mentioned. Secondly, keep in mind that these numbers can be influenced by whether or not your channel's audience know about my survey and respond to it, so keep all of that in mind. Now first off, we had 10% of respondents say that they don't watch any YuGiTubers in general, or any Master Duel content specifically. So moving on to number 1 is Farfa as always, at a whopping 30% of respondents choosing him as number 1, where he continues to bring a sense of humor to a variety of Master Duel replays. Then at second is MBT, where you can find him going up against a lot of well-known YuGiTubers in Master Duel, so go check that out. And then at third is this encoder, who is most well known for bringing Yu-Gi-Oh ruling videos, and now you can enjoy some Master Duel content from him as well. At fourth is Pack, who always brings really informative competitive content, so that only continues with this new simulator. At number 5 is Team Sam, who of course is really one of the biggest Yu-Gi-Oh channels out there, and you can catch some rank replays with fan favorite decks like Heroes and Dinos on his channel. Tied for 6th is Triff Gaming and Duel Links Meta, so if you're interested in playing pendulums, whether real life or online, make sure to check Triff out. As for Duel Links Meta, unfortunately I don't follow any Duel Links content creators, so I don't know anything about his channel, but clearly is a very successful one and very well liked. Tied for 7th are Simo, Team APS, and DB Grinder. Simo of course is most well known for the Progression series, but he has lately brought some Master Duel content as well, even streaming on Twitch now. As for Team APS, another really big channel where they recently posted a fun Master Duel related skit, so go check that out. And of course, DB Grinder, and maybe soon to be Master Duel Grinder, is most known for bringing replays of really competitive players, and his content is very helpful in getting you to be a better player. At 8th, we have DZeef, most well known for playing Altergeist, but he has been bringing replays of various decks on Master Duel and is one of the bigger Yu-Gi-Oh channels out there. And then tied for 9th are Lithium and Rada. So Lithium has been bringing good guide videos for this simulator, and is of course the Monarch Master and has brought videos on that as well. I don't think Rada has any Master Duel content on his YouTube channel, but instead he's streaming it on Twitch, but I don't personally go on Twitch ever in general, so I can't speak too much on that unfortunately. And finally, tied at 10th are Sir Eminon and Yassine. Sir Eminon of course brings really in-depth combo guides and competitive replays on Master Duel. Then we have quite frankly the best Cyber Dragon player out there in Yassine, who will basically bring you deck profiles and combo videos for any deck that practically exists. So make sure to check out all of these content creators when you have the chance if you are interested in this game. Alright guys, so that was a longer data video than I typically would like, but hopefully you enjoyed that. Again, thank you for participating and sharing the survey if you did, and the next survey I'll be initiating will be in a couple of months to get your predictions on the next ban list, so watch out for that one. Take care guys.